Chapter 1. The Auction at Sundown. The sun was slipping low, bleeding red and gold across the wide Wyoming sky, and the dust of Main Street rose in lazy swirls under the hooves of tired horses. Cole Hargrove reined his bay gelding at the edge of town, squinting past the brim of his hat. He'd come for feed, nails, and maybe a new axe handle, but the sound drifting down the street wasn't the usual saloon piano or hammering from the blacksmith's forge. It was the call of an auctioneer, sharp and fast, slicing through the heavy evening air. Cole's jaw tightened. Auctions at this hour rarely meant cattle. He dismounted, boots thudding against the packed dirt, spurs giving a dull jingle. As he walked toward the sound, the wooden planks of the boardwalk groaned beneath his weight. The chatter of onlookers mixed with the dry creak of wagon wheels, the scent of sweat and horse leather hanging thick. A small crowd had gathered in front of the freight office, men with whiskey-warmed faces and dust on their coats, women watching from the shadows of second-story balconies. Up on the makeshift platform, a row of figures stood under the harsh orange glow of a kerosene lamp, thin, dirty, and young. Child laborers. Cole stopped at the edge of the crowd, his eyes narrowing under the brim of his hat. He'd seen this before, indentured contracts changing hands like cattle deals. The mining companies had a stranglehold on the region, and sometimes the only way for a man to get clear of debt was to sell the people in his charge. The auctioneer's voice rattled on, quick and practiced. Strong back, good with a shovel. $6. Do I hear 7? One boy was taken by a ranch foreman. Another, barely old enough to lift a bucket, was claimed by a saloon owner for kitchen work. Then the auctioneer's tone changed, slipping into a showman's drawl. Now here's a rare one. 14 years old, tough as boot leather, and not afraid of a little hard work. She can cook, clean, and keep her mouth shut. The girl stepped forward into the light, and Cole saw the truth behind the man's words. She was rail-thin, her dress little more than a sack stitched into shape. Stray strands of sun-bleached hair clung to her forehead, damp with sweat. But it wasn't her clothes or the grime on her cheeks that caught his attention. It was the way she looked at the crowd. Defiant. Her chin was high, her jaw set, eyes sharp enough to cut. Bid started low. $3, then 4. The men chuckled, tossing numbers around like they were haggling over a mule. She didn't flinch. Cole felt something in his chest tighten, an ache he thought long buried. He remembered a time, years ago, when he and his late wife had spoken about filling their house with children, only to have that dream burned away by the doctor's quiet apology and a cold diagnosis. Since then, the ranch had been nothing but work and silence. $5, called a voice in back. A miner would sit still on his face. 6, barked another, a man whose belt sagged with a pistol. The girl's eyes flicked between them, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. Cole's hand moved before he thought about it. 10, he said, his voice low but carrying over the murmur of the crowd. The auctioneer blinked. $10? Do I hear 11? The room quieted. The miner swore under his breath. The man with the pistol muttered something and stepped back. No 11? Going once, twice. Sold. The auctioneer slammed his gavel against the rail. To the gentleman in the hat. Cole stepped forward, counting out coins that felt heavier than usual. The girl watched him without blinking, like she was waiting for catch. You're with me now, he said quietly as he led her down from the platform. I didn't ask to be, she shot back, her voice sharp as barbed wire. He didn't answer, just handed her the second set of reins and nodded toward his horse. The sunset stretched long shadows over the street as they walked toward the edge of town. Somewhere behind them, the saloon piano struck up a slow, mournful tune. Cole swung into the saddle, watching her mount with practiced ease. For all her thinness, she rode like someone who'd done it all her life. The sky deepened to purple, coyotes calling far off in the hills. As they started down the trail, the dust rose behind them, swallowing the sounds of town. Cole didn't know why he'd stepped in. Not exactly. But as he glanced at the girl riding beside him, her eyes fixed stubbornly on the horizon, he knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Chapter 2, The Girl Who Wouldn't Bow. The trail home wound through rolling plains brushed with sage and the faint gold of prairie grass. The sun was a molten coin sinking low, casting long shadows of horse and rider across the earth. Cole kept his gaze ahead, his hat pulled low against the glare. Beside him, the girl Annie, he would later learn, rode in silence, her back ramrod straight, her small frame wrapped in a stubborn dignity that refused to bend. She didn't look at him once. They passed the shallow creek that marked the halfway point to the ranch. The gelding drank greedily, but Annie's mare only dipped her head briefly before she straightened, eyes scanning the horizon as though she were charting her escape route. Cole noticed the way her fingers tapped the worn leather of the reins, not nervous, but calculating. "You ride well," he said finally, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the creak of saddle leather and the distant cry of a hawk. She gave a small shrug. "Better than I scrub floors." The edge in her tone was deliberate. Cole let it pass. He dealt with green colts and half-broke mustangs. If you came at them hard, they only kicked. The ranch appeared as the sun slid lower, weathered barn, sagging fence lines, the main house standing solid but in need of paint. Beyond it, the land stretched for miles, rolling toward a far ridge where the light turned copper. It was quiet country. Too quiet, some said. As they rode into the yard, the sound of hoofbeats echoed against the empty corral. Cole dismounted, the dust puffing under his boots. He waited for her to follow. "Get your bed in the bunkhouse?" she asked, half a statement, half a challenge. Cole glanced at her, his eyes unreadable under the brim. "You'll take the spare room in the house." "Closer to the kitchen." Her brow twitched, just barely, but enough for him to see the surprise. "And what do you expect me to do there? Cook? Clean? Sleep at your feet?" "I expect you to eat," he said simply, loosening the cinch on his gelding. "Then rest. Work can wait till morning." Annie's lips pressed into a thin line. She slid down from the saddle, landing light, and followed him toward the house with the gait of someone who refused to lag behind. Inside, the wooden floorboards groaned under their steps. The smell of old pine, leather oil, and wood smoke hung in the air. The kitchen was plain: stove, table, 2 chairs, shelves stacked with jars of beans and flour. Cole set out 2 plates, ladled stew from a black pot still warm on the stove, and slid one across to her. She didn't touch it at first. "You buy me at an auction, bring me to an empty ranch, and expect me to believe this is charity?" Cole sat opposite her, spoon in hand. "I didn't buy you to own you. You were headed somewhere worse." "And you're better?" she asked. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "I guess you'll find out." The stew's steam curled between them, carrying the scent of beef and onions. She finally took a bite, chewing slow, her eyes never leaving his. Cole ate in silence, the only sound the faint tick of the cooling stove and the wind brushing the shutters. When the meal was done, he stood, took her empty plate, and began clearing the table. She rose too, instinctively reaching to help, but then caught herself, fingers curling against her side. "You've got a roof over your head now," he said, his back to her as he rinsed the plates. "You'll work here, same as me, but you'll be paid, and you can leave if you want." She tilted her head, studying him like she might a coyote circling the yard, still deciding if it meant danger or not. "What's the catch?" He dried his hands and turned, leaning against the counter. "Only one. While you're here, you don't have to bow to anyone, not even me." Her mouth quirked, almost a smile, but not quite. She gave a short nod, as if filing the words away for later judgment. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of coyotes, and the last light of day poured gold through the window, catching the dust motes in the air. Cole felt the quiet between them shift, still wary, but no longer hostile. It wasn't trust. Not yet, but it was something. Chapter 3, Ghosts of the Past. The wind had picked up after sunset, rattling the shutters and carrying the dry scent of sagebrush across the yard. Inside the ranch house, the fire snapped and popped, casting flickers of gold across the plank floor. Cole sat in his usual place at the table, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. Across from him, Annie hunched over a chipped mug of coffee, her bare feet tucked under the chair to warm them. It had been a week since the auction, and in that time they worked side by side, mending fence posts, hauling water, tending the horses. She still spoke little, but the silence between them was no longer edged like a drawn knife. It was quieter now, almost companionable, almost. Cole set the rifle aside and poured himself more coffee. "You'll freeze your toes off sitting like that," he said. She shrugged, but her eyes lingered on the fire. Been colder before. The way she said it made him pause. He leaned back, chair creaking. "Mining camp?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she took a slow sip, staring into the flames. "3 winters. Underground most of the time. You forget what sunlight feels like after a while. You forget a lot of things." Cole watched her fingers tighten around the mug, the knuckles pale. "You had folks." "A brother," she said after a beat. "Older. We were taken together. He didn't make it." The words were flat, but her shoulders stiffened like she was holding herself against a hard wind. "I'm sorry," Cole said quietly. She glanced up at him, eyes sharp again. "Don't be. Sorry doesn't bring anyone back." He didn't argue. Instead, he reached for the coffee pot and topped off her cup without asking. She gave the smallest nod in thanks, and that was enough. The fire popped again, and outside a coyote's cry rose and faded into the night. Cole took a slow breath, his gaze drifting to the mantel where a small silver locket lay, tarnished with age. "She was going to fill this house with kids," he said, his voice low. Annie looked up, uncertain who he meant. "My wife, Mary. Fever took her 3 winters back. Doc told us long before that I couldn't, well, that we'd never have children. She wanted him anyway. Said it wasn't about blood. Said love could make a family just as sure." Annie's gaze softened, though her mouth stayed set. She sounded like she was stubborn. Cole smiled faintly. She was more than me. Silence hung again, but it was different now. Annie's eyes returned to the fire, her lashes catching the light. Cole studied her in the glow, noting the way the heat painted color into her pale cheeks, the faint tremor in her hand as she lifted the mug again. Not fear, just the body remembering hunger and cold. "You keep looking like you expect me to run you out," he said after a moment. "That's been my life," she replied simply. "You work until they've had enough of you. Then they sell you or toss you out." Cole's brow furrowed. "You work here, you're part of this place. Ain't nobody running you out." Her eyes flicked to his, searching for a catch. A trap? Finding none. She leaned back in her chair, a little of the stiffness in her spine easing. "We'll see." He didn't press. Trust was like a skittish colt. You didn't grab for it. You let it come close in its own time. The clock on the wall ticked slow and steady. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of snow from the mountains. Cole rose, dropping another log onto the fire. The sparks spiraled upward, dancing in the draft before fading into the chimney's dark mouth. "You can take the room upstairs," he said over his shoulder. "Bed small but warm. You need more blankets." "Say so." Annie stood, hesitating. "Why?" He turned, one brow lifting. "Why what? Why were you doing this? You don't know me." Cole's gaze held hers, steady as bedrock. "Don't need to. I just know you don't deserve the hand you've been dealt." Something flickered in her expression. Quick, almost hidden, but it wasn't anger. She gave a small nod, the kind you give when you're not ready to believe, but you're willing to try. She climbed the stairs without another word, the floorboards creaking under her steps. Cole watched until she disappeared from sight, then turned back to fire. The house still felt too big for one man, but tonight the silence felt less empty. Chapter 4. Fire in the Dark. The night was moonless, the kind where the sky felt too close, pressing down with its weight of stars. The ranch had gone quiet hours ago, horses in corrals shifting now and then, the faint jangle of a loose halter ring carrying on the cool air. Inside, Cole sat at the kitchen table, ledger open, pencil in hand. Annie had gone to bed early, claiming she was bone-tired, though he'd seen her glancing at the shelves, quietly memorizing where things were kept. It was the smell that hit him first, not the comforting scent of wood smoke from the stove, but something sharper, oil and char, drifting in through the cracked window. Cole's head came up fast. A flicker of orange light bled across the far wall. He was on his feet in an instant, boots pounding across the floor. "Annie!" he shouted, flinging the door open. The barn was ablaze. Flames licked high into the black sky, the dry timber snapping and spitting sparks. The panicked whinnies of the horses tore through the night air, the sound cutting straight into his gut. He sprinted toward the barn, but Annie was already there, barefoot, hair loose around her shoulders, a bucket in her hands. She vanished inside before he could stop her. "Damn fool, girl." Cole yanked the well rope hard, filling a bucket and tossing on the nearest flames, the hiss of steam rising. Inside, the heat was suffocating. Smoke curled low under the rafters, and the horses thrashed in their stalls, eyes rolling white. Annie was at the far end, working the gate latch on Cole's gelding, coughing but refusing to back away. "Get out!" Cole barked, striding toward her. "I'm not leaving them," she shot back. yanking the gate open just as the gelding lunged past her toward freedom. She stumbled but caught herself, moving on to the next stall. Cole swore under his breath but joined her, untying ropes, herding the terrified animals toward the open door. The heat bit into his skin, sweat pouring into his eyes. A rafter above him groaned, showering sparks. "Annie, move," he roared. She ducked as the beam crashed down behind her, the flames surging higher. The smoke clawed at her lungs, and she doubled over coughing. Cole grabbed her arm, hauling her toward the open air. They stumbled out into the yard, the rush of cool night wind a shock after the furnace heat inside. The last of the horses galloped into the darkness, their hooves drumming against the hard ground. Cole pulled Annie with him toward the water trough, dousing a rag and pressing it to her hands. The skin was red and angry where the rope had burned her. "You could have died," he said, voice rough, more shaken than he wanted her to hear. She looked up at him, eyes glinting in the firelight. "So could they?" For a moment, neither spoke. The crackle of burning would fill the air, and beyond it, the faint, distant howl of coyotes. Cole's heart was still hammering, but the sight of her, hair wild, cheeks streaked with soot, eyes fierce, lodged something tight in his chest. "You got more grit than sense," he muttered, his thumb brushing along the edge of the burn without thinking. Her gaze softened just enough for the corner of her mouth to twitch. "Guess that makes two of us." The barn's roof gave way with a deafening crash, sending a column of sparks spiraling into the night. Cole didn't look away from her, not even then. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You saved my stock tonight. That means you saved my living. I won't forget it." Annie pulled her hand back gently, looking toward the field where the horses had fled. "Just don't start thinking I'm the sort who bows easy. I did it because it was right, not because I owe you." Cole nodded once, something like respect, something heavier, settling in his eyes. "Fair enough." The two of them stood in the glow of the dying fire, the ranch quieting again around them. It wasn't trust, not fully, but the line between them had shifted, moved closer, without either of them quite realizing it. Chapter 5. The Saloon and the Sheriff. The next Saturday, Cole hitched a wagon before sunrise. He told Annie they were riding into town for supplies, but the way he kept glancing at the horizon said it wasn't just about flour and feed. Annie climbed up beside him, hat pulled low to shade her eyes. The road stretched dusty and endless ahead, the wheels squeaking over ruts, the prairie wind tugging at loose strands of her hair. They reached town just as the sun cleared the ridge, bathing the street in hard, bright light. Main Street was already busy, ranch hands drifting in and out of the general store, a pair of drifters loitering by the hitching post, the distant, lazy plink of a saloon piano. Cole tied the wagon outside and led Annie toward the general store. She felt the stairs before she saw them. Men leaning against door frames, eyes tracking her like wolves scenting fresh meat. She stiffened her spine, refusing to shrink under their gaze. Inside, they collected sacks of flour, tins of coffee, salt pork. Annie handled the small items, her hands quick and sure. But when they stepped back out into the sun, Cole steered her toward the saloon instead of the wagon. "I don't drink," she said flatly. "Not here for that," he replied. "Sheriff will be inside this time of morning." The saloon door swung open with a dry creak, letting in a wash of cigar smoke and the smell of spilled whiskey. The room was dim, the piano player in the corner working a slow, tired tune. Men sat hunched over their drinks, murmuring, and then the murmurs grew louder. Look at that. Hargrove finally bought himself company. One man drew from the bar, his voice carrying. Another laughed, the sound sharp. Figured you for a lonely type, Cole, but didn't think you'd be desperate enough to buy a child bride. Annie froze mid-step, heat rushing to her cheeks, not from shame, but from the hot, instant flare of anger. Cole's hand twitched at his side, but his voice stayed calm. "You boys looking for trouble?" he asked. The first man smirked. "Just saying what everyone's thinking." Before Cole could answer, Annie stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room like a whip crack. "I'm not his wife. I'm not his anything. But I'll tell you one thing. I'd take work on his ranch over licking whiskey glasses for the likes of you." The saloon went quiet for a heartbeat, the air thick with surprise. The smirk slid off the man's face. Cole's eyes flickered. Pride there, though he didn't let it show too much. "That's enough," came a firm voice from behind the bar. Sheriff Deacon stepped out of the shadows, broad-shouldered and wearing his badge like it was part of his skin. "You too, cool it, or I'll cool you myself." The men muttered but backed down, returning to their drinks. The sheriff turned to Cole. "Word's been going around. The men that own her labor before ain't too happy you outbid 'em. They've been sniffing around. I mean the kind that don't mind settling things with bullets." Cole's jaw tightened. "If they come to my land, they won't walk away happy." Deacon's gaze slid to Annie, his tone softening. "You sure you know what you're stepping into, girl?" She met his eyes without flinching. "I'm not going anywhere." That settled it. Cole paid for his supplies at the counter, and they left under the watchful eyes of half the saloon. Annie didn't speak until they were back on the wagon, the horses pulling them onto the open road. "You didn't have to defend me," Cole said after a moment. "I wasn't defending you," she replied, her eyes on the horizon. "I was defending me." But she hesitated, glancing at him from under the brim of her hat. "I guess I was defending the ranch, too. Feels like mine already." Cole didn't answer right away, but his grip on the reins eased, and the faintest ghost of a smile touched his lips. Behind them, the town faded into heat haze. Ahead lay the long, sunlit stretch home, and the knowledge that danger was no longer a distant rumor. It was riding toward them. Chapter 6, Blood and Dust. The morning was so still it felt wrong. No wind through the sage, no distant coyotes, not even the usual creak of the windmill. Cole was in the corral, mending a gate hinge, while Annie carried water from pump, the sound of the bucket sloshing the only thing breaking the silence. Then came the low thud of hoofbeats. Not one horse, many. Cole's head lifted, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. Dust rose in the distance, thick and churning. He set down his hammer slowly. "Annie," he called, his voice calm but firm. "Get inside the house. Now!" She froze, reading the change in his tone. "Is it inside? Go." But she didn't. She set the bucket down carefully, walking toward the house, but keeping her eyes fixed on the approaching riders. They came fast, 6 of them, rough men with rifles slung over their backs, dust coats open to show pistols at their hips. Cole recognized the one in front immediately. Mason Brigg, a foreman for the mining company that had once owned Annie's contract. The riders slowed as they hit the yard, their horses blowing hard. Mason's grin was the kind that never touched his eyes. "Afternoon, Hargrove. We came for what's ours." Cole stepped up the fence, his stance easy but his voice like iron. She ain't yours. Never was. That girl's labor was paid for. You stole her out from under us. Mason's eyes flicked toward the house, where Annie had stopped on the porch, her hand gripping the post. She can come quiet, or she can coat a rope around her wrists. Cole didn't move, didn't blink. She's not leaving with you. Not now, not ever. The men shifted in their saddles, the air between them thick with the unspoken threat. Annie's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't look away from the man on the fence line. Cole didn't just look ready to fight. He looked willing. Mason's grin slipped. You think you can take us all? Cole's voice dropped, quiet enough that it made the men lean forward to hear. I don't need to. Just need to make sure I take you first. That was when Mason's hand twitched toward his gun. The moment stretched, a breath before a storm. Annie didn't think. She moved. She ran to the barn, grabbing the Winchester from its rack. The men's eyes tracked her, and one reached for his rifle, but Cole's shotgun came up smooth and fast. The first shot cracked the silence like lightning. Dust exploded near Mason's boots, his horse rearing. Then the yard was chaos. Men shouting, horses turning, the sharp smell of gunpowder burning the air. Annie slid in beside Cole, dropping shells into the Winchester with hands that shook only once before steadying. He fired. She passed him fresh rounds. She fired. He covered her reload. It was a rhythm born in seconds, sharp and sure. A bullet tore splinters from the porch post near her head. She ducked, teeth clenched, and returned fire, catching one of the men in the shoulder. He yelped, tumbling from his saddle. Mason cursed, wheeling his horse back. This ain't over, Hargrove. One by one, the riders broke off, retreating in a haze of dust. Cole's last shot chased him past the ridge, the echo rolling across the open land. When the dust settled, the yard was quiet again except for the harsh sound of breathing. Cole lowered his shotgun, his chest rising and falling. Annie still held the Winchester tight, her pulse pounding in her ears. He looked at her, eyes fierce but softened with something else, something warmer. You could have been killed. She met his gaze without flinching. So could you. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Cole reached over, his hand brushing over hers, easing the rifle from her grip. You're a damn sight braver than I bargained for. And you're slower at reloading than you think, she said, the ghost of a grin tugging at her lips. That pulled a laugh from him, short, rough, but real. The kind of laugh that carried relief and pride all tangled together. The sun was high now, baking the dust where the fight had been. In the distance, the riders were gone, but the knowledge hung between them. They'd be back. Only next time they'd both be ready. Chapter 7, A New Kind of Family. A week passed after the gunfight, but the echoes of it lingered in the air like the faint scent of burned powder. The ranch felt different now. Still quiet, still open to the wind, but with an unspoken agreement between Cole and Annie that they belonged on the same side of the line. The corral was full again, horses grazing with an easy rhythm, their hides glossy under the afternoon sun. Annie had taken to brushing them in the evenings, humming under her breath, though she denied if asked. Cole watched her sometimes on the porch, leaning against the post, a cup of coffee warming his hands. That evening, the sky was lit with the pink-gold wash that came before sunset. Annie knelt by the porch steps, planting something in the dry earth. Cole wandered over, curious. "What's that?" he asked. She pushed a stray hair behind her ear, smudging dirt across her cheek. "Marigolds. Found the seeds in an old tin in the pantry. Figured the place could use some color." Cole crouched beside her, the scent of earth and sage between them. "Flowers won't survive the first frost." "Maybe not," she said with a shrug, "but they'll grow while they can. That's enough." He studied her face, the set of her jaw. She'd come a long way from the wary girl on the auction block. Still guarded, still sharp, but with edges softened by something that looked suspiciously like hope. "You've been working like this place is yours," he said. She glanced at him, the corner of her mouth twitching. "Feels like it might be." They finished planting in companionable silence. The sun slid lower, shadows stretching long across the yard. When they finally stood, Cole motioned toward the porch. "Come on, I've got something to show you." Inside, he pulled a small, dust-covered box from the shelf. He set it on the table between them and lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, sepia images of the ranch in its early days. Mary standing in the doorway with a stubborn smile, Cole younger, his eyes less weighed down. Annie hesitated, then picked one up. She was pretty. "Yeah," Cole said quietly. "She was." Annie set the photo down carefully. "She's the one who wanted kids." He nodded, said blood didn't matter, that you made a family by standing by each other. "Never thought I'd hear that again until you." Her breath caught, but she masked it by leaning back in her chair. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "I know enough," he replied, his voice steady. "You fought for this place. For me. You've done more than some folks I've known my whole life." The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the space between them. Annie's eyes dropped to her hands, calloused from weeks of ranch work. "I don't know if I can stay forever, but I want to, if you'll have me here." Cole's jaw worked like he was holding back a rush of words. Finally, he nodded, then it settled. "You've got a place here for as long as you want it." Something in her posture eased, her shoulders lowering, her grip on the chair loosening. She looked up at him, and for the first time there was no trace of suspicion in her gaze, only warmth. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of the saloon piano from miles away, its notes threading through the cool evening air. Annie stood, moving to the doorway, and looked out over the land, their land now, even if she couldn't say it out loud yet. "You were right," she murmured. "Family is about choosing." Cole came to stand beside her, the fading sunlight painting his profile in gold. "Then I'm choosing you, Annie, every day from here on." She didn't answer right away, but when she finally did, her voice was soft and certain. "Then I'm choosing you too." The prairie stretched out before them, endless and untamed, the first stars beginning to prick the sky. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. Chapter 8. Forever Under the Western Sky. Spring came slow to high country, but when it arrived, it painted the land in colors Annie had never thought could belong to the West. Soft green shoots breaking to the brown earth, wildflowers stubbornly blooming between rocks, and the air carrying the smell of rain mixed with sage. The ranch had changed since the night Cole bought her freedom. Fences were mended, the barn rebuilt stronger than before, and the corral full of healthy horses and cattle. Laughter had returned too, rare at first, but now it rolled easily between them, like a river that had finally found its course. That evening, the sun was dipping low, setting the sky on fire with streaks of crimson and gold. Annie was brushing down the bay, gelding, when she heard Cole's boots on the barn floor. He leaned against the stall door, watching her with that quiet, steady way of his. "Come outside," he said. "I've got something to give you." She arched a brow. "If it's another chore, I'll pass." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Not a chore. Not this time." They stepped out into the open yard. The breeze was soft, carrying the sound of a meadowlark song. Cole stopped near the porch, fishing in his pocket before pulling something small from his palm. It was a simple silver band, dull by age but polished clean. Annie stared at it, her breath catching. "Cole, this belonged to Mary," he said quietly. "It's not about replacing her. Nothing could. But she always said this ranch needed more than one pair of hands and more than one heart. I think she liked knowing I was passing it to someone who's fought for this place same as she did." The evening light turned the ring to molten fire in his hand. Annie swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in her chest. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice low. He stepped closer, his hat casting his eyes in shadow, but she could hear the warmth in his voice. "Annie, I've been sure since the night you stood your ground in that saloon and told those men this was your home." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I was just angry that day." "Maybe," he said, "but you meant it." The silence that followed was rich with all the things neither had dared to say out loud until now. Cole reached for her hand, the roughness of his palm familiar and grounding. Slowly, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit, snug but right. "This isn't about ownership," he said. "It's about partnership. About saying we face whatever comes next together." Her throat tightened, but she managed a nod. "Then I'll wear it." They stood there for a long moment, the prairie stretching out behind them like an endless promise. Above, the first stars pricked the darkening sky. Annie leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "for a man who claimed he didn't want trouble, you sure picked up a lot of it when you brought me home." Cole's chuckle rumbled deep in his chest. "Best trouble I ever found." In the distance, the wind carried the faint strains of the saloon piano from town, slow and sweet, as if the whole world had decided to play them out. Annie's gaze followed the horizon, but she no longer looked past it for escape. Her place was here, beside him, under this vast, unending sky. The sun slipped away and the night took hold. The porch lamp flickered to life, casting a warm halo around them. Cole kissed her then, not rushed or desperate, but sure and steady, like the land itself. When they finally stepped back, Annie's hand tightened around his. "Looks like we got a family now," she said, her eyes shining. Cole glanced toward the barn, where the horses shifted softly in their stalls, and then to the house, its windows glowing warm. "Yeah," he said, "we do." And together they stood on the porch, watching the stars spill across the sky. Partners, equals, and, at last, home. The sun bled red and gold across the endless plains, the light catching on the dust that hung in the air after the last of Mason Briggs' riders had fled for good. The ranch yard was quiet now, only the soft shuffle of horses in corral and the low groan of the wind moving through the sage. Somewhere far off, the saloon piano played a slow, lonesome tune that carried on the breeze like a memory. Cole stood on the porch, hat in hand, his shirt torn and streaked with the day's fight. Annie stepped out beside him, the silver band on her finger glinting in the dying light. They didn't speak at first. They just stood there, looking out over the land they'd fought for, bled for, and claimed together. "I thought I was just buying a chance to keep you safe," Cole said finally, voice rough. "Turns out I was finding the rest of my life." Annie smiled, a rare, unguarded thing, and slipped her hand into his. "And I thought I was just surviving another man's choice, but I was walking toward my own." The wind carried the scent of sagebrush around them, and as the sky deepened to purple, they stepped down into the yard, their shadows stretching long toward the horizon. The ranch was theirs now, not just a place, but a promise. They turned toward the house together, and the door shut softly behind them, leaving only the quiet hum of the prairie night.